Okay, so Ilan, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me today. You have a unique perspective to some degree on the topic that we're going to be addressing, which of course is digital technology and international relations. International relations, of course, being at the top of the news agenda at the moment, likely to be so perhaps for some time. And so our conversation, I think, is especially timely. I thought I would begin by really with an introduction question around the overall impact that digital technology is having on power in international relations. I just thought I'd ask you to introduce that and perhaps provide some examples of how we're seeing this appear in the world today.
So it's interesting because the question of power is one that obviously has always interested IR scholars. And what is power? How do you define power? What is a powerful nation? Is a nation powerful because it has a strong military, because it has a very positive reputation, because it has power in multilateral institutions? How do you define power? Um, and there used to be this dichotomy that was once suggested by a scholar called Joseph Nye that you have hard power and you can have soft power. And Joseph Nye writes about this in the late 1990s, early 2000s. And he said the age of the Cold War was the age of hard power. And what he means is military power, financial power. You got what you wanted in the world through coercion or through paying for it. That's when you had two superpowers vying over control of the world. And he says as we enter the 1990s and the 2000s, we might be seeing a new form of power, which is called soft power, which is the ability to attract and the ability to get what you want because others want to follow your lead, not because they're forced to do it, not because they're dependent on you to shield them from Russian missiles. So they let you build an airbase, but they want to welcome you because they would like to do business with you, or they want your level of affluence, or they want to be associated with you because you have a very good reputation on the global stage. I have never bought into this paradigm of soft power. I've always thought that it's a little bit of BS, to be honest, because I think that ultimately what shapes international relations are interests. States have interests, they pursue those interests, and they can pursue them through a range of actions. These can be military actions, it can be diplomacy, it can be culture, it can be movies. I think that the Marvel Cinematic Universe is as important to American power as its military bases around the world. If the world's culture is American culture, and if the world's icons are American icons, that's another instrument of power. Digital technologies influence power in international relations in several ways. First, because it's a new resource. So, for instance, there's a lot of talk today about global supply chains that you're going to need to develop chips, computer chips, microprocessors. So, suddenly, if there's a certain mineral that is used to produce computer chips, and you are a nation that has a lot of those minerals, then you suddenly have power, you suddenly have leverage, you can achieve your interests by selling this mineral to a lot of countries. I would also say that technology sits at the power nexus, but not in the way that most people think. And I'll give you an example. A lot of people are talking about the power of AI. And when we talk about the power of artificial intelligence, a lot of people think about military applications. They think about guidance software. They think about automated weapons. There's a lot of talk about that national AI infrastructure. But the amazing thing is that AI also has power because it is a trusted source of information. And people are using what is termed AI to learn about the world. So if you use ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude, you might be using it for work, you might be using it to plan a trip. And suddenly you ask Claude, by the way, tell me, why does America support Ukraine in its war with Russia? Tell me, why is China eager to take over Taiwan? And what we found in our studies is that the answers you get from different AIs are different based on where the AI was created. And that American AI, such as ChatGPT and Gemini, give you American answers and they kind of help you make sense of American policies. They'll tell you that America wants to support Ukraine because it always fights for democracy. But if you ask the Chinese AI, why does America support Ukraine? It's because America is a hegemonic power that wants to rule Ukraine. And what you have here is suggestive power, the power to shape how people view the world. So digital technologies, it's a very broad spectrum, of course, it's a very big field, but I think sometimes it influences state power not in the way that people think. If you are Estonia and you create an AI that becomes a very popular tool around the world, and people ask that AI to explain what is happening in the world, to explain whether Russia is a good country or a bad country, to explain whether we should support America or not, you suddenly gain a lot of power. The fact that the most popular social networks in the world are American are part of American power. So it creates new opportunities for states to obtain their interests. It can be new ways of leveraging, it can be new ways of negotiating, it can be new ways of utilizing technology. Just as a final example, a lot of countries have a very limited diplomatic staff around the world. If you look at a country like Lithuania, most of their embassies are two diplomats. The amount of work that the Lithuanian foreign ministry is able to do today because of AI compared to the amount of work that they were able to do 5 years ago has probably tripled. So it influences, so suddenly the Lithuanian foreign ministry is much more able to conduct diplomacy on a global scale, and that increases the power of Lithuania. Even if we're talking about Zoom, the ability to Zoom from an African capital and not necessarily be represented in every institution around the world increases your power because you can represent yourself at different forums around the world where you don't necessarily have a representative. So I think technology creates new power dynamics, it creates new opportunities, it also creates new risks. And the thing about technology is that it is relentless. It is always advancing. There is always a new technology to master. There is always a new technology that is disrupting our world. What that does to power is it leads to instability. Because if technology influences power and if technology is always changing, then power is always changing and new power configurations are always taking shape. And I think it's part of the reason why we seem to live in a very unstable world. It's because of power relations constantly being reconfigured and reconfigured yet again because of technology. And that's been very central to my thinking about digital technologies and power.
And very important that we understand that at the start of this interview, because we're going to explore various aspects of it. But of
Sure.
course, you've described the environment that we have now. But what you also do is provide guidance to the governments that are now trying to behave within this new environment and address it in ways that presumably will be beneficial for them. So, um, could you just say a little bit about the guidance that you provide to governments today, to national foreign affairs departments, on
Yes.
how digital technology might affect their activity? What do you tell them?
So it's interesting because I got into this field in 2014 and I was doing my master's thesis at the time at Tel Aviv University. And the reason I even got interested in this world is that my father he was a diplomat for 43 years, an Israeli diplomat. And he came home one day absolutely frustrated and he threw down his bag and he said, I can't believe it. I have enough on my docket. I've got enough stuff to deal with. Now they want me to be on some social network called Twitter. What is this? This is nonsense. And I thought that was very interesting that the Israeli Foreign Ministry wanted its diplomats to be active on these social networks, which then were primarily used to boast about achievements and to take selfies of yourself and kind of, reach out to friends that you haven't seen in 50 years. And that's when I first got interested in it. And the fact was that the field of digital diplomacy at the time was very much unexplored. And foreign ministries were kind of facing this dilemma. We need to become more digital, but how do we do it? Now, foreign ministries by nature are not very open institutions. Diplomacy by nature is about it's about holding information and leveraging information. It's not necessarily about sharing information. And so when I first approached the foreign ministry and I said I would like to do some interviews with your diplomats about how they use digital technologies, I was sure they were going to say, no, 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 we don't talk about that. They said, we'd be delighted. But also, we're writing a guidebook about how diplomats should use Facebook, and we're using a guidebook on how diplomats should use Twitter. Could you offer us any insight? And because, like I said, technology is always changing and emerging, foreign ministries have been quite open to scholars in the field and kind of invited us in. And there's almost a quid pro quo. We help them understand technology. Sometimes we give them guidance on how to use technology. And in exchange, we get to see the dilemmas that they're facing. We get to see how the institutions are changing in face of digital technologies. We suddenly find that they have concerns we've never thought about, or they see opportunities that we've never even imagined. So it's been very interesting. I would say that in the first few years when I was providing guidance, it was all about how do we become viral. So everyone is getting information on social media. You need to stand out of the pack on social media because people are scrolling through endless feeds. How do we become viral? How can we attract attention? What should we be doing? And that was a question that was repeated across a lot of foreign ministries in Western Europe and in Eastern Europe. Even in Asia, when I was invited to work with some of the foreign ministries in that region, it was all about how do we make diplomats interesting? Because a lot of diplomats are not necessarily interesting. A diplomat who's negotiating a very complicated trade agreement between two countries who are not exactly superpowers. I mean, how many people are interested in what he had for breakfast? Or how many people are interested in the actual accord that he's negotiating? That was the main concern. Then, of course, things started to shift because of disinformation, Russian disinformation in the Crimean takeover, Russian disinformation around the world, Chinese disinformation, the automation of disinformation with what we call bots and software, interference in Brexit, interference in the German elections. And suddenly it was all about how can we best combat disinformation. And how do we combat fake news? Where there's a news website that seems very reputable, seems to be legit, but actually it's being operated by another government, and people are exposed to it. What are the best strategies that we have for debunking disinformation? Now I would say that there's an AI craze, and everyone is about how do we best leverage AI. And I think that what I have transitioned in the expertise that I give to diplomats and to foreign ministries that it's not about the technology and it's not even about what's trending. It's about what are you trying to achieve? What are your foreign policy goals? Then can that goal be achieved in some way using digital technology? Now, it's possible that the conclusion will be no. I mean, if we want to get elected to the UN Security Council, we need to go and we need to have a campaign at the UN and we need to get nations to vote for us. Or maybe the answer will be yes. If we have a viral campaign for the UN Security Council and we become the hip country that everyone wants at the Security Council, maybe we'll get in. And I think there's also been a change amongst diplomats because there's so many digital technologies, because there's so much digital information that it's too big for any foreign ministry to master or to combat by itself. And so it's now become this idea of strategic management. How do we manage the digital world to our advantage, given that we have limited capabilities? I'll give you an example. The American State Department manages 3,000 social media accounts. 3,000. It's an empire. It's a social media empire. It's managed by about 6 people. Now, the whole idea is that if you're on social media, if you're on Twitter, you appeal to one kind of audience. If you're on Facebook, you're communicating with another audience. If you're on TikTok, you're communicating with another audience. And suddenly the State Department found itself, why are we managing 3,000 social media accounts? We don't have enough content to even upload here. So maybe we're in trouble. And what we actually see now is a lot of foreign ministries scaling back on their social media use and kind of investing the powers elsewhere. Another thing is that ultimately digital technologies, I don't think, reshape diplomacy. Digital technologies reshape society and then diplomacy adapts. So I'll give you an example. A lot of foreign ministries now have dedicated social media accounts or websites that target their own population. Now, why would foreign ministries have a social media page for their citizens? Foreign ministries face the world standing with their backs to their nation. A foreign ministry is meant to represent you to other countries. It's meant to talk to other people. Why would the Canadian foreign ministry be tweeting to Canadians? Why would the Irish Foreign Ministry be tweeting to the people of Ireland? Well, there's two reasons. First, a lot of people are confused about what is happening on the world. A lot of people are confused about what it means when America kidnaps a president of Venezuela, or a lot of people are not really sure what it means when the UN Security Council becomes devoid of all power. Or a lot of people aren't sure even what is happening. What is happening in Ukraine? What is the Syrian civil war? And diplomats have entered this gap. And what we found in some studies is that diplomats have a high level of credibility amongst their own population. If you're a Canadian ambassador and you're talking to Canadians, the Canadians take you seriously. And even as serious as a journalist. So suddenly you have this world of domestic digital diplomacy, where it's diplomacy that's geared towards your own citizens and helping them make sense of the world. And that's because the world has become so confusing, and information, you're not even sure what is accurate information anymore. Another way that digital technologies reshape society is that you've got this world of crowdfunding. Now, I don't know if you know this, but Ukraine, from day one, has been crowdfunding its war with Russia. You can donate directly to the army of drones that Ukraine is building. You can donate directly to military units who are fighting in the field. You can give to Ukraine. There's websites and social media accounts. They've got this huge crowdfunding campaign going on because society is one in which it's possible to do crowdfunding via digital means. So at the end of the day, the question is, how does digital technology reshape society? And then what impact does that have on diplomacy? And I guess with a lot of foreign ministries these days, it's two questions at the moment. First, how do you influence what the AI is saying? So someone asked ChatGPT about Denmark, and he got a horrible result. Denmark is a very boring country, and you should never visit Denmark. And the Danish foreign ministry wants to know, how can we change what the AI is saying about us? The second thing is leveraging AI. How can we integrate AI into the foreign ministry? And this is, of course, is also a very broad issue. It can be from doing simulations for diplomats to doing simulations about world affairs to just digitizing and creating, instead of a chat GPT, a State Department GPT. At the end of the day, I think diplomats too have stopped asking how can we adapt to new technologies, and they've started to ask how can we leverage new technologies. And the countries that do it best are countries that really fuse technology into their foreign policy, where it becomes a foreign policy that's built around technology and leveraging technology. So that gives you maybe a little bit of insight. I can give you another, just as a funny story.
Sure.
I was doing my PhD in the UK, and I was writing a blog about digital diplomacy. And I had published quite a few posts about the Russian embassy to London. The Russian embassy to London is a fascinating Twitter account. It's humoristic, it's sarcastic, it's highly offensive, and it's a bit crazy. I mean, they publish pictures of nuclear bombs going off and say good morning to you. And I wrote a few posts about that, and I knew the Russian press attaché in London, and he was in charge of the Twitter account. And he called me one day and he said, would you be willing to come to London and meet with me? And I said, yes, okay, I will come to London and meet with you. This is the Russian press attaché in about 2018, 2019. And he asked that we not meet in the embassy, but we meet in a cafe. And I entered the cafe, and it was very small, and there weren't a lot of people in it. And once I walked in, the owner got up and changed the sign from open to closed. And I thought, this is the moment that I'm going to be recruited by the KGB. This is it, this is the spy movie. And he said to me, Ilan, people in Moscow are very angry. They have read your blog post about my Twitter account. They are not satisfied. They are not happy. You cannot keep posting about our Twitter account. It's getting too much attention from Moscow. And that's another thing, by the way. Digital technology reconfigures power within foreign ministries. It reconfigures who is actually in charge of the of the diplomatic apparatus. Is it the embassy? Is it headquarters? So anyway, I think to summarize, the question has shifted from how do we use technology, how do we adapt to technology, to how do we leverage technology to our goals and to what we want to achieve.
And, as an example close to home, Canada is going to be renegotiating its trade agreement with the US and Mexico in the coming months. and
Uh-huh.
presumably the use of technology to influence perceptions and behavior around that amongst Canadian citizens will be should be an objective of the Canadian people who are dealing with that agreement.
Yes, and there's another aspect to it. Digital enables diplomats to do something that they've never been really able to do, which is market themselves to the national population as important instruments of government. Because what diplomats do is offshores, because what diplomats do is in other countries, if you're a Canadian, you might not know what Canadian diplomats have done to benefit you over the last year.
Sure.
And because you have this blurring in the digital world of the national and the international, and because the foreign ministry suddenly has national publics that it can address via digital, diplomats have started to market how they support the nation, how they help the nation. What is it that diplomats do for the nation? And this is part of a major struggle by foreign ministries to stay relevant in the digital age when a lot of people are saying we don't need embassies anymore. We can have a Facebook account, or we don't need embassies anymore. We can have a chatbot that answers questions. So it's a very dynamic field. It's a very interesting field, and the domestic aspect is becoming more and more important.
And this really prompts my next question, which was around the actual role of ambassadors. So
Mhm.
presumably, there was a role they played before these technologies were available, and there is a new role they will play in the future. And so I thought I would ask, what does this mean for the job description, perhaps, of an ambassador? Are there areas of their job that will disappear? And are there new areas that will appear? And does this mean that ambassadors, need different characteristics than they've had in the past?
So, I mean, ambassadors still carry a very interesting title. Historically, ambassadors to foreign courts were called extraordinary and plenipotentiary. That's their title. So if you're the ambassador to the UK, you're the ambassador to the Court of St. James, whatever your name is, who is extraordinary and plenipotentiary. And the idea back then, when this kind of title was bestowed on ambassadors, was that they had the purview to sign agreements on behalf of their king or queen. And that's because the technology of the day is sending letters via horseback. So if you were the Canadian ambassador in France, you could negotiate a trade agreement with the French king and then sign it as an ambassador on behalf of the Canadian king or queen or whatever. And that was the trade agreement. And it would be sent back to your capital, and they would read and they'd say, okay, this is what we negotiated. Obviously, digital technologies have transformed the role of ambassadors. I mean, this started with the telegraph because suddenly the ambassador doesn't have to make the decisions. You can just wire them back to London and London makes the decision. And when I speak to diplomats, it's interesting. When I speak to ambassadors, they tell me that the technologies that most impacted their work was the fax machine. Not social media, not email, but the fax machine. Because suddenly there really was this idea of real-time management of international crises. Because of the fax machine, your embassy in Moscow or your embassy in Bratislava or your embassy in Vienna could in real time send a fax to Washington or to Canada. This is happening. What should we do? And you could send a fax back. And it really kind of led to a transition that diplomacy was something that was almost done in real time. Now we move to the 21st century. And I think that a few years ago, there was a lot of ideas about how ambassadors need to have social media accounts. Ambassadors need to have a digital profile. Ambassadors have to be attractive online. And this was so much the dogma back in the day that the head of the UK in the Foreign Office, the head of the digital division, told his diplomats, you can't be boring and you're all very boring. So start being interesting or you won't have any followers. And this was really something that, and then ambassadors started to go online and to tweet about their work and to tweet about their life and to tweet about what they were doing. A few of them became what you might call Twitteratis, or they became kind of social media celebrities. But I think quickly they realized that the medium wasn't necessarily the message, in the sense that, yes, they can go and they can tweet and they can post, but the amount of followers that they're actually going to get is going to be relatively small. the amount of impact that they're going to get is relatively small. And then again, they did this shift from asking how do we adapt to technology to how do we use it. So I'll give you an example. There was a French ambassador to America a few years ago, and he would use Twitter in a very provocative way. And he would blast the American president, he would blast the American Congress, he would make fun of Americans. And they did an interview with him in the New York Times, and they asked him, "Why do you do this, ambassador? Why are you so provocative on social media?" And he said, "It's because I don't have access to the Oval Office anymore. If the American president has a problem with my country, he calls the French president on the phone. How do I get into the Oval Office?" And he said, "I get into the Oval Office by being on Twitter and being written up about in the New York Times, and then the president has to welcome me into the Oval Office." And that's it's an interesting story because it shows you forget about adapting to the medium, forget about adapting to technology, let me leverage it. Today, an ambassador, I would say that this is true of all diplomats. It's not only true of ambassadors, but you cannot be an ambassador anymore without understanding technology and the importance of technology, because it has become so vital to international relations and it's become so vital to diplomacy. Now, the problem is that most ambassadors, even if they grasp the basic idea of a technology, let's say that you explain to an ambassador what an algorithm is and how the algorithm works and how the algorithm filters information on social media, he gets it. But he will never be an expert on algorithms. He will never be able to code an algorithm. So they have to understand the basic functions of technology. They have to manage the digital apparatus of their embassy, and embassies now have an entire digital apparatus, and you need to know what is actually being done in the digital front. And probably a lot, maybe not a lot, but a significant portion of the work relates in some way or another to technology. We want you to sign a deal with this country, we want to further relations with this country, we want to limit our exposure in this country, and a lot has to do with technology. At the end of the day, the core functions of an ambassador to represent his country abroad, to build ties with political elites, to build close ties with the governments, and to build influential ties in society hasn't changed. So the core functions of an ambassador have not changed. The realms in which he needs to be an expert may have expanded. But at the end of the day, the core functions of an ambassador, I don't think have changed so much in the digital age as we might have thought. And sometimes if you want to create very close relations with political elites, technology is a very effective way of doing that. So ambassadors, for instance, a lot of them love WhatsApp and they have WhatsApp groups. So you can have a WhatsApp group of ambassadors in a certain location, or a WhatsApp group for ambassador and ministers in a government, or a WhatsApp group for an ambassador with a lot of important journalists, and he can brief them in real time via WhatsApp. But at its core, it's not different from what he did 50 or 40 years ago.
Okay.
There is a new realm, I think, of activity which is called tech diplomacy. And this is something that foreign ministries haven't really applied yet, and they're going to have to. Foreign ministries are going to have to create tech desks, tech departments, where you have people who have dual hats. They are experts in technology and they're experts in negotiation. And the reason is that the technology is so complicated that if you really want to hammer out an agreement about cryptocurrency regulation, if you really want a bilateral accord about ethical development of AI, you really need to know your material. And if diplomats don't know the material, they will be squeezed out of these negotiations and others will move in. Tech companies will move in. Moguls will move in. Advisors to the president and to the prime minister will move in. If diplomats want to stay relevant, they're going to have to develop in-house expertise, people who really understand the digital technology that you're talking about, who can code an algorithm, who actually understand how Facebook functions, who actually understand the changes that happen every day to Google's algorithm. But that's something that foreign ministries haven't done yet, and if they don't do it, they're going to be left out of international relations.
Yeah, you're suggesting that you're describing what needs to happen, but you're suggesting that foreign ministries are very slow to move in the direction that they need to move.
That's an interesting question because technology advances very quickly. Foreign ministries are reluctant about technology in general. They take time to process things. That's also true. That's true of all governments. And maybe once you could describe diplomats as apprehensive. Now that we're 20 years into the digital revolution, I think that foreign ministries have actually become remarkable at adopting innovative technologies. They've become remarkable at identifying strengths and weaknesses. And if you look at some foreign ministries around the world, they really are innovative. Sometimes they're ahead of the marketplace.
Mhm.
That's how innovative they can be. Then the question is, how do you stimulate innovation within a foreign ministry, which is a very hierarchical institution, where there's the permanent undersecretary, and then there's his advisors, and then there's the head of the department, then there's the junior head of the department, there's the ambassador, the second in command in an embassy. Hierarchical structures by nature might not be very conducive to innovative thinking, because you're always thinking about what you're going to report upwards. You're not thinking outside the box. But it really has forced diplomats to do that. But I think what's happened is that we've crossed a precipice where the technology is just too complicated and the demands are just too great that regular diplomats won't be able to do it. So, what do I mean? If the idea was, how do we best use Twitter to market ourselves as a tourist destination in another country, diplomats could learn how to do that. If the question was, how do we use LinkedIn to connect with our diaspora and bring the diaspora back home if we have a brain drain, diplomats could figure out how to do that. Even if it was digital disinformation, in broad strokes, they could understand how disinformation works and what is a bot and what is a fake news site and what is a troll. They could figure it out. But the technology now is so complicated and is so advanced that diplomats will need an in-house tech department. I mean, I don't think it's reasonable to think that all diplomats in the Canadian Foreign Ministry will understand quantum computing and that they will be able to tell you where quantum computing is going to be 5 years from now, or that they will be able to tell you in 10 years quantum computing will look like this, in 15 years the demands will be. They might not be even able to imagine what the technological landscape will look like in 10 years and start preparing for that landscape, which is what foreign policy is. If you know what the technological landscape will look like in 5 years, you can start preparing today. Maybe you need new alliances because there's a new material everyone's going to need. So we've crossed the precipice where the technology is so complicated now that you need an in-house tech department to help you. But I would not characterize diplomats as being slow to adopt digital technologies. I would not characterize foreign ministries as being tech resistant. Of course, it changes from country to country, and there are different factors that influence your openness to technologies. But on a whole, I'd say that foreign ministries have done a quantum leap in technology. I mean, I was at the Japanese Foreign Ministry giving a lecture on digital diplomacy. I think this was 10 years ago. And their main question was, should we be on Facebook? I mean, that was the question of the day. And today, the Japanese Foreign Ministry is everywhere and it's doing amazing things. And they've really been able to close the gap. The problem is that the technology is very, very complicated. I mean, can we really expect a diplomat to understand how neural networks actually operate and what deep learning is? I'm not sure. So they're going to need in-house tech department. And this goes back to the question of power, right? Because if you're negotiating tech agreements, and there's going to be more and more of those, if you're creating a tech-oriented alliance, if you're sharing tech with allies, whether it's civilian technology or military technology, you really need to understand the risks and the possibilities available. And that's why a lot of international relations is going to be digital international relations. And for that, to survive in that world, diplomats will need this tech department that I'm talking about, where you have in-house expertise that can really help you write a cryptocurrency accord between China and Canada.
Okay, and presumably the empowerment which comes with technology for individual ambassadors and perhaps missions to individual countries, from a foreign ministry point of view, to manage the exercise of the power that technology enables requires a degree of strategic coordination and integration in the approach that is taken. So you've talked understandably about the different roles that diplomats might play, but what we haven't talked so much about is the strategic implications of them doing that. So, does this create challenges, create a need for foreign ministries to have the means of effectively harnessing this new capability.
Yeah, strategic thinking is very interesting when it comes to technology because this is where there is a gap in foreign ministries. Foreign ministries have become used to lagging behind and closing the gap. So a new technology hits the market. It could be Alexa, it could be cryptocurrency, it could be NFTs. A new technology comes into the world. Foreign ministries, what they usually do is the technology comes into society, technology becomes popular, it comes to the attention of the foreign ministry, they learn how to use it. What I've always tried to impress on foreign ministries is actually the need to think forward. So instead of always adapting to what's coming out, taking a more strategic approach and asking, what will the technological landscape look like in 3 years? What changes do we need to implement now to be ready when that technology comes because it's around the corner? And in order to do that, you really have to be connected into the tech community or into the tech world. I mean, you need to have access to R&D units who are right now in Silicon Valley or other parts of the world working on the next big technological wave that's going to hit us. You need to know what prototypes are being developed. You need to know what are the next big advancement in chip production going to be so that you can prepare for that. And I think that's also started to happen. And I'll give you an example. A growing number of countries have embassies and ambassadors to Silicon Valley. And that's a very interesting shift in power. It's a very interesting shift in how foreign ministries work because these ambassadors and embassies to the Silicon Valley have two roles. First, fostering close ties with tech companies so that tech companies don't operate against them. And that tells you that Silicon Valley is a new seat of power in the world because embassies reside near seats of power. And after there was this big digital boycott of Russia because Russia invaded Ukraine and a lot of companies left the Russian market, everyone is afraid that Silicon Valley could flex their muscles against France or the UK or Jordan or Bahrain. So you've got ambassadors there who first really are tasked with managing ties with tech companies, much like you would a foreign court or a government. But second, it's also staying connected to what is happening in the tech world, forwarding that back to headquarters and saying, this is what it's going to look like. These are the prototypes that are going to be developed. I don't know if you remember, well, you probably do, but there was this big rage about augmented reality and virtual reality. And we were all supposed to be wearing special glasses and the Meta glasses and the Google glasses and everything was going to be glasses. Then everything was going to be the metaverse and the metaverse was going to be everywhere. And you actually had countries who opened embassies in the metaverse. And these things, a lot of time, kind of just go up in smoke. It turns out that it's not the fad that it's meant to be. And there were some countries who were able to see that coming around the corner because they had people on the ground in Silicon Valley. They were in touch with angel investors. They were in touch with R&D units, and they would ask them, is this really going to be the next sensation? And people were saying, no, there's no chance. It's not feasible. It's not going to work. It's not even fun to use. It's nonsense. And so that's strategic. Strategic is thinking 3-4 years ahead and preparing for the next landscape of digital technologies. I think that some foreign ministries are doing that. Slovenia is doing a very interesting work with other ministries in the government. They have now a dedicated team within the foreign ministry that's responsible for forecasting. What is the world going to look like in 6 or 7 years? And they have different parameters that they look at: society, governance, military power, but also technology. And the idea is to map out possible ways that the future is going to look like in 4 or 5 years based on all of these parameters and beginning to prepare for them. Do you need digital-oriented diplomats? Do you need diplomats who can speak the language of AI? Do you need to harness AI? Do you need to develop an in-house AI tool? Is AI really all the rage, or is it just another way of looking up for information? And I think that's starting to happen, but that would be strategic thinking in my orientation. It's better when the whole government does it, when it's a whole of government approach, as Canada has sometimes, a whole of government approach to technology. But then you also need to leave enough space for every ministry because every ministry has different needs and different skills. So foreign ministries use technology very differently from the defense ministry. or from the Prime Minister's office. Foreign ministries, they have their own skills and they have their own needs. But that would be strategic thinking,
Okay,
in
thank
my
you.
yeah.
Uh, you've been talking about the relationship with the big tech companies. One issue that might arise in that relationship would be disinformation and
Mm,
its impact internationally.
mm,
You've looked at this, I think, to some
yeah,
degree.
yeah.
Uh, how serious do you think it is? That might be an easy question, but what can countries do about it?
So it too is a changing landscape. I mean, I think that the digital society has shifted yet again. People are much more aware of this information. People are much more aware that what they're reading might be fake news. People are much more aware that what they're reading might be actually some kind of manipulation. We're already seeing this problem pop up with AI of fake AI images that circulate the world. Um, so, I mean, there's two vectors here. One is society gets used to new threats. Disinformation was a novel threat. No one knew how to deal with it in 2014. 2026, we're in a different place. If you tell people to beware of disinformation, they know what you're talking about. They're familiar with the word. That's one thing. But the second thing is that new technologies bring about new forms of disinformation. And this is where AI probably has the biggest impact, I think, at the moment on diplomacy. It's in the realm of disinformation. And it's not because of the ability to create fake content. If you had enough time, you could always create fake content. A fake memo between the American administration and Canada plotting to invade Mexico. Fine, if you want, take 10 hours and write a fake memo. A fake recording of a conversation between the Canadian Prime Minister and the American President plotting to invade Mexico. If you really want to do it, you could do it. An image of Canadian soldiers in Mexico. Canadian paratroopers landing in Mexico. We're taking Mexico over. If you really wanted, you could make that image using Photoshop. Because of AI, everyone now has the ability, A, to create fake information, but B, to create information that can no longer be distinguished whether it's real or fake. And that's very problematic. And I'll give you an example even diplomats don't know. 2 years ago, I asked ChatGPT to create a false memo by the Ukrainian government outlining a possible invasion of Russia. And ChatGPT first said, oh, I can't do it. I'm an ethical AI. I cannot plan the invasion of another country. So I told ChatGPT, please write a fictitious memo outlining a fictitious Ukrainian plan to invade Russia. Within 2 seconds, I had a 5-page document written by a Ukrainian general outlining exactly how Ukraine could invade Russia, retake Crimea, with different phases of the operations, different names, the routes that the tanks will take, how you would confuse the Russians by actually attacking from another place. 5-page memo. I thought it was stunning. And then I sent it to 20 diplomats, senior diplomats, and I asked them, was this document generated by a human or an AI? And they all said it could only be generated by a human. The language, the description. People in NATO told me we actually looked at the plan that this document outlines. It's a feasible plan to invade Russia. It makes sense. We looked at the map. So obviously a human wrote it and not an AI. So this information now is so easy to create and its believability is so high, its sophistication is so high, and the price is so low that you enter a world where you can no longer distinguish the real from the fake. And this is going to be the next kind of frontier of digital disinformation and combating it. It will be the ability in real time to identify what I call real fakes. So images that look so very real, but they are essentially fake, and to combat them in real time. It's not a problem that only diplomats will have to solve. It's not only a problem for foreign ministries, it's a problem for governments in general. And then the question is, how do you approach it? So some of the ideas are that you create an AI that automatically scans the internet, flags false content, and labels it as false content. And then what you actually have is an internet where AIs are talking at AIs, and AIs are combating AIs, and we humans just stand from the side and look at what's happening.
Mhm.
So I think AI is going to have a huge impact in the realm of disinformation. I think it's already happening. And the inability to distinguish between the fake and the real will first impact society and then impact diplomacy. Now, what can be done about it? I don't think there's any one solution, but I actually think that there might be an opportunity here to create the first kind of real global AI governance. And the reason is that authoritarian regimes by nature tend to look very stable and they tend to project themselves as very stable, but they're terrified of AI too. The Russian administration is terrified of fake AI images circulating at just the right time, at just the right minute, and suddenly you've got hordes of people in the street. The Chinese are terrified of false content being generated by AI about corruption by Chinese officials that hits the street at just the right time. That suddenly you have a huge demonstrations in China. Look at what's happening in Iran right now. Huge demonstrations across the country. And if you send out just the right incendiary AI disinformation to those protests, they could erupt even more violently. And I think there's suddenly a new need here for all regimes and for all governments to deal with the new threat of AI-based disinformation. And because I told you I believe in interests, because they're shared interests, there's suddenly an opportunity here for new diplomatic environments, for new agreements. Imagine an agreement hammered out between the Canadians, the Brits, and Russia about what you can and cannot post using AI, trying to combat AI-based disinformation. And the Russians have just as much as interest in doing that as Canada and as the UK, in my opinion. So suddenly, you've got a new middle ground where diplomacy can kind of regain its place and regain its momentum. Because if you follow diplomacy and IR, it seems that most diplomatic forms these days are just non-functional. I mean, the UN Security Council, nobody counts them anymore. The Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe has done everything but secure security and cooperation in Europe. But this is a new, I think, realm, digital technologies and AI-based disinformation, where actually countries who have very different interests on the globe have the same interest in the digital space. And that might be a new avenue for diplomats to use in order to kind of rebuild momentum of diplomatic agreements and diplomatic rapprochement. And maybe if an American diplomat and a Russian diplomat hammer out an agreement about AI fakes and AI disinformation, and they've worked opposite one another for 8 months on that, maybe suddenly they can meet in the room and say, you know what? We figured out AI, now let's figure out Ukraine. And that's what diplomacy is. Diplomacy is about building trust between negotiators and then moving trust from one arena to another. Now that we've hammered out an agreement about missiles, now that we've hammered out an agreement about oil, now let's talk about AI. And you could take the trust built from AI accords and implement them in other fields as well. So I actually think that this might kind of rejuvenate global diplomacy. But it's a real threat, and it's coming closer than what most people think. It's coming sooner than what most people think. I'm a professor at the university, and I have stopped giving my students written papers or essays to write because I cannot distinguish anymore between what has been written by the student and what has been written by the AI.
No.
And that's going to be the same with reports coming into foreign ministries. I mean, is this report about a possible coup in Venezuela written by ChatGPT and pure disinformation, or is it actually written by our diplomats on the ground? So it's definitely a new threat, but it's also, I think, a real avenue of diplomatic growth and potential for accords and agreements.
Presumably, that level of international cooperation around disinformation would also enable the discussions with the tech companies and the exercise of influence over those companies for their cooperation as part of this.
So this is where I'm not an optimist. This is where I become a pessimist. I mean, let's face it. Most of these tech companies are in America or they operate in America. The business of America is business, as the former president said. I don't think that the Americans are going to regulate tech companies anytime soon. And if Americans don't regulate tech companies, no one is going to do it. I mean, it's very nice that the European Union has all of these laws that it passes, and it's very nice that they slap Google every now and then with $1 billion fine. Google doesn't care. Facebook doesn't care. And I honestly do not think that these tech companies like OpenAI care too much about the broader societal impact of what they're doing. They're trying to make money. And the problem with technology today is that the technology can become so important so quickly that the company goes from having no market valuation to being worth $1 trillion in a year. And once a company is worth $1 trillion, no government is going to flex its muscle against it. So in order to get real tech regulation, I think you need to get American regulation. And there was a period when America regulated business. Standard Oil, very famous company, at the end of the day was broken up as a monopoly. Meta is a monopoly, Amazon is a monopoly, Google is a monopoly. All of these companies have to be axed, they have to be cut up, they have to be split out. There's too much power in too little hands. But does that mean that they'll come to the table? I don't think so. Maybe the other thing will happen. Maybe a different thing will happen. Maybe you'll have enough countries come together in kind of an AI pact that together they'll have enough leverage on America to force America to regulate tech. I will say that this goes back, by the way, to the question of power. You might have new power brokers in the world based actually on their ties to the problematic actors. Because if you want to have a tech agreement, a global cryptocurrency agreement, you have to get some of the nefarious actors. You need to get China to sign it, you need to get North Korea to sign it. And then you need people who can get you into the Chinese government and into the North Korean government. So suddenly, a power broker such as Qatar, right, who has ties with everyone, suddenly becomes very important, and it has a lot of power on the world stage because it can bring these different actors with different interests together because it has ties with everyone. This might be a new source of power for Russia. Russia is very good at maintaining ties with some of the worst governments in the world. They might actually be able to leverage that because you need some of the worst governments in the world if you want to have a global accord about tech or a global accord about ethical development of AI or not crossing an AI threshold. So again, it goes back to the power, to the question of power. And we have seen in the past that digital technology can reshape or dramatically impact the power of a country. And I'll give you an example. A few years ago, we did a study. Who is the most popular foreign ministry on Twitter amongst foreign ministers, amongst foreign ministries? So let's say we take the network of foreign ministers that are on Twitter. Who is the most popular? Who does everyone follow? Who's the king of the pack? It was Iceland, and it was Peru, and it was Chile, and it wasn't the United States, it wasn't France, it wasn't Germany, it wasn't the UK, it wasn't Canada. It was really surprising. And the reason was that those foreign ministries were tweeting the most information, and they were tweeting the most valuable information, and they were tweeting the most valuable information in real time. So everyone followed them. And it suddenly gave these countries a new way of exercising power because they were very dominant online. So if they wanted to market a new foreign policy or get allies, they could do that using social media. So again, it all goes back to the question of power that you said earlier. And I think that we might have new power brokers who are coming up in the world. And it might be interesting to see how tech influences power brokers and who is a power broker in the world of a few giants.
Okay, we're getting short of time, so I would like to just ask a couple more questions though. The first
Please.
one is about I know that you've looked at the use of digital media by countries in times of crisis. And in particular, you've looked at how they characterize their opponents. I thought I'd ask why that is so important and how they do this.
Well, in times of crisis, if we're talking about crisis in terms of two nations going to a violent conflict between two, three, or four, or five nations, the goal of diplomacy I'll rephrase that. During times of war, conflict, or crisis, the goal of diplomacy changes. The goal of diplomacy in times of conflict is two main objectives: to legitimize your use of force and delegitimize another side's use of force. Ukraine diplomacy at the moment is centered on legitimizing the fact that Ukraine is firing on Russia and delegitimizing the fact that Russia is firing at Ukraine. So diplomacy kind of becomes a dual game. You need to legitimize your use of force and say it's okay that we're firing on a country, and delegitimize the other side. Say that it's not okay that they're firing on us. Even if they started it, it doesn't matter. And digital technologies in general have proven to be quite effective in delegitimizing opponents and tarnishing their image. And sometimes it's done via disinformation, sometimes it's done covertly, sometimes it's done overtly. But what digital technologies enable you to do is to become very creative in how you depict other countries. And it enables you to vilify countries in new ways. And really, when you turn another country into a villain in a conflict, any conflict, the country that's the villain is the country that is most likely to lose diplomatically, because no one wants to help the villain and everyone wants to help the hero. This is tied to storytelling and the ability to tell stories on social media. It's tied to the ability to create digital environments where you can influence people. It's even tied to AI applications. It's tied to smartphone applications. But at the core, the essence is the digital technologies make it easier for you, I think, to delegitimize a country on a global scale, to vilify a country. And once you've done that, suddenly you become the legitimate actor. Suddenly you become the actor that others want to help. And in a time of conflict, that's what you really need. Ukraine cannot defend itself without arms shipment from other countries. Now, if Russia had succeeded in vilifying, they tried. Russia tried to vilify Ukraine. The Russian narrative has been that Ukraine has been taken over by radical neo-Nazis. Russia has always opposed neo-Nazis, so Russia is opposing neo-Nazis today. It's very simple. But it never took hold. Most people do not view Ukraine as a neo-Nazi state. So they tried. It just did not work. As it does work within Russia or within Russian affiliated countries. And digital enables you to do this for all kinds of reasons. We don't necessarily have to go into them, but that's the core idea. That to vilify a country on a global scale is easier to do today, and that's how you win wars.
Okay, and the final question, developing countries
Mm.
and foreign relations includes work often to provide assistance to developing countries. So you've looked at the role of digital technologies in this. Can you talk about that a little bit?
So, I mean, I will. This again goes back to power relations and actually power asymmetries. And I'll give you an example. We have this term developing countries, where me and you both have a vague kind of concept of what we're talking about when we say developing countries. Maybe we have a list of countries. Maybe, by the way, it differs a little bit. Sometimes developing countries are in other regions than you'd expect, but we kind of have a shared language about developing countries. And we just released, we're about to release a study that we did where we asked ChatGPT and other AIs, give us 10 good things about developed countries. And we said, tell us 10 good things about Canada. Tell us 10 good things about France, the UK, Germany, America, Japan, New Zealand. And tell us 10 bad things. And also tell us 10 good things and bad things about developing countries. So countries in the global south. Let's call them global south because it makes it a bit easier. And it was very interesting to see that the bad things about Canada is that they can be very cold in the winter, and that you might be spending a lot of money on heating, and that if you don't book in advance museums in the summer, you might not be able to enter because they're so popular. That was the bad things about Canada. Then we went to bad things about developing countries. They're corrupt, they're terrible, there's violence, you don't want to visit there, you don't want to go there. Then we said, what are the good things about developed? What are the good things about Canada? Well, there's social security and there's benefits, and you don't lose your home if you're sick, and there's liberal values and all this. And then we said, tell us 10 good things about Rwanda. Well, the people are very nice and you can do a safari. And it's amazing to see these discrepancies in the depiction of global north, global south countries. Now, that is because the data is biased. Most of the internet is biased against developing countries. So, this is just to say that whenever a new technology comes out, it tends to be an uphill battle for developing countries. But there's also a flip side to that, and that is that technology can sometimes aid developing countries, especially in matching the power of more affluent countries. So, an African ambassador, an African embassy, an African foreign ministry can be as influential on social media as Canada, the US, China, and Japan. The ability to zoom into conversations, the ability to do diplomacy in a distance has very much benefited developing countries who don't always have representatives to all of these places. So it's kind of a mixed bag, but I would say that on a whole, for developing countries, the struggle with when we're talking about digital diplomacy, when we're talking about diplomacy and its impact or when talking about digital and its impact on diplomacy, for developing countries, it's always an uphill battle because technology is created in the global north and it prioritizes the global north at the expense of the global south. And it doesn't matter if it's Wikipedia, Google, or AI. It's always an uphill battle for these developing countries because the technology is created in the global north and because the global north is so biased towards the global south that they're always at a disadvantage. If we go back to the idea of new power brokers, you might find that some developing countries will be new power brokers in the world of 5 or 6 years from now. So it might begin to change.
Hopefully.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you for talking to me today, Ilan. I could have talked to you for much longer. I have many more questions that I would love to hear your thoughts on, but of course we're limited by time. But I really do appreciate you talking to me. This will be valuable for the people at the University of Waterloo, and thanks again.
Thank you.